welcome to my channel. I have been waiting forever to get this man on my show. Welcome to my show, Berkey. How you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
You are so dressed up. I asked you to wear your best, and here you are looking so fancy.
You caught me post-workout. This is all I got for you today.
Oh, it's the best I've ever seen you.
Sure. Right up there with the Live at the Bike appearance.
Live at the Bike was fine. I would say you brought your best also to Stones.
I don't even remember that stream.
That was like that was a big part of everything that's happened, I guess, in this past 6 months for me, and you were involved in that. That was like the session that led me. Remember me talking to you like, hey, what do you think about Mike Postle? And you're like,
Yeah.
oh, he's a great post-fop player.
You were so low key about everything, not wanting to influence my answer.
Well, that was after the show. I asked you after.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to influence you, but I was curious what you thought about how he played that night. But I guess it was like it's different when you're playing against him, and it's a small sample size for you. So.
Well, not really. I mean, even in the small sample size, I didn't think he was cheating, but I thought something was very strange. Like, I just thought he was the luckiest guy at the table because he was doing things in such an unorthodox way that I just know isn't profitable, but yet he was never losing at Showdown.
But you were looking at it in a vacuum, and
lens that I'm not being cheated. So I'm just trying to figure out logically, like, how he's doing what he's doing. And I'm just like, oh, he's super lucky.
Did you see the latest article on him with the ultimate bet?
Oh, yeah. The being friends with Russ Hamilton or whatever.
Yeah, and being on the ultimate bet, like blackjack or whatever blackjack thing they had going on TV back then, ultimate bet blackjack or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all crazy. I feel like you might be a little burnt out on it, so I don't want to steer the conversation into that.
It's not that I'm burnt out. It's just I feel like we've exhausted all we can do. So I'm kind of like, whatever. Like, I don't know. I mean, I think like continuing to talk about it is just like, it's weird because it's this thing where it's like you don't want people to forget because that's an easy way to sweep something under the rug. But at the same time, like, all the conversations at this point are just like speculative water cooler talk.
Fine. Be that way. No, I just don't want it to die. I want consequences for Mike. But at the same time, it does feel like beating a dead horse
I get asked on stream all the time, like, what's the update with the Postle situation? It's like exactly what you would think it is. It's in litigation forever.
I'm really excited that he's representing himself. I'm very excited at that courtroom drama. It'll be fun.
I can't fathom why Stones would let him do that.
Do you think that I kind of feel in a way that Stones is going to try to settle and then leave Mike to his own? Do you know what I mean?
Okay, fine. That makes sense. But aren't they both being implicated in the same class action?
Right, but separately. So Mike is separate. Then Justin and Stones are kind of one entity. We're suing them as one, and then Mike separately. Everyone thinks it's three separate entities, but it's not.
I see.
So I feel like
I thought the opposite. I thought he was lumped in with
no. And so I feel like Stones will try to settle and just get this out of their hair, and then just say, okay, we've settled. We're not liable anymore. Here's what we found. Go hard. And then Mike's left to his own. That would be
a really interesting turn of events because, well, it's interesting from two perspectives, right? One, from the lawyer's perspective, so Mac and that whole team, they stand to make no money from Mike. Like, he just has nothing to give. So,
and I have heard that after winning sessions, he would go straight to Reno. And all of his money on sports betting.
But even if he had all of that money still, after cost of living and whatever's going to happen, you're squeezing blood from a turnip. So from the lawyer's perspective,
you're so Eastern European. You squeeze blood from turnip, from beet. Okay, go ahead.
So from like Mac's standpoint, from a strategy, if he wants to get his clients actual compensation, it makes sense to nail stones to the cross. But if bigger picture, you can get like, I don't know, 60% of the same retribution from stones, and then they help you basically prove that Paso was a lone actor, that could potentially lead to like some criminal implications down the line, I guess.
So I think Stones probably has more criminal implications than Postle. And so there's two different journeys, I guess, Mac is on. One is accountability. Mm-hmm. So Stones and Mike having accountability, and then monetary like rebates, I guess, getting the money that was stolen from us. So those have to be balanced out.
It's like juggling loss of life versus the workforce with COVID.
It's adorable because I'm not interested in that conversation at all. I really think those two are one. I think that loss of life means our economy goes down, and it saddens me.
I think our economy.
Are we getting? We're getting political.
Yeah. Well, no, not political at all. Economically speaking, I think we are headed for quite the downturn. Like, I think we'll see depression-like a depression-like economy regardless. It's just a matter of like how long that lasts.
I think parts of our economy are going to rebound. The parts that will make the best of people being stuck at home, delivery services, stuff like that.
Yeah.
I like that the strippers in Vegas have what have they created an app where they deliver not what is it called? They did a spin on one of the delivery services.
Like Uber Eats?
It was like Uber Eats, but Boober Eats. I think it was called Boober Eats.
That's funny.
It's amazing.
Oh,
sorry. They're making the best of the situation.
No, that's legit funny.
So, one reason I wanted to have you on here is because I feel like you're one of the few poker training sites that have adjusted and adopted to this COVID-19, where you have these new poker at home, or what is it called again?
Homeschool.
Poker homeschool. So tell me what that's all about.
It was born out of desperation in some regard, in the sense that we had 2 sold out academies on the calendar that got canceled because of COVID. And we had the plans to run 3 more, at least maybe 4 or 5 in the fall and winter. And now those are kind of up in the air. So for us, that's a lot of revenue. That's probably like 65% of our annual gross income. And we need to figure out a way not to replace it, because we're just not going to, but we needed to figure out something that would carry us from where we're at currently at the forefront of that's a wrong way of putting it. It makes it sound like we're the leaders of the COVID-19 brigade. But like, we're just on the precipice of the economic downturn that we're going to see from this. I think the fallout is going to be long-standing, and I think we're all in for a long winter when it comes to how this is going to impact us both socially and economically. So it wasn't a matter of replacing that income. It was just more so a matter of figuring out a way to service that small subset of our community in the near term that would also help us keep the lights on. And we were just like, well, suddenly everybody has a ton of free time, like more free time than they know what to do with, including us, because now we don't really need to be preparing for all of these events. And I just kind of threw out the idea. I was like, what if we just like teach a curriculum, like a college class, or like basically like summer school, where these guys have 4 to 6 weeks off of most of their duties, and suddenly have the time to really put in the hardcore diligent study that everybody wishes that they could dedicate
And
the time to.
3 hours a day. Is it 5 days a week? It's 5 to 8 p.m.
It's 5 days, quote unquote mandatory. And then I do an office hour on Saturday. That's another 3 hours.
Wow. And that's included in the program.
Yeah. Yeah. So effectively it's like 18 hours of training a week. We give assignments every Friday. We split everybody up into groups of 10. So they work on that collectively, and each assignment builds off the last. So like week 1 was mostly just like pre-flop range construction, teaching pot odds models, the basic underlying math that drives the game. And the worksheet was to effectively build out ranges by position and by action. So we gave them 3 average formations: under the gun versus under the gun 1, under the gun versus big blind defense, and then button versus small blind 3-bet. And so they just need to build out these ranges, and we'll build off of that then moving forward. Like as we get into the flop, we'll say, okay, like now let's build out your betting strategies. Same thing with turn and river.
Very interesting. So this is how long is the program?
4 weeks. So somewhere between.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say somewhere between like 60 and 75 hours, give or take.
Are you going to have a program that's going to build off of the previous? Because I know people who are going to be doing the first 4 weeks, maybe they're going to want to continue. Is that something you're doing?
Honestly, I'm hesitant to, for the same reason I was hesitant to even do this. People are going to struggle, right? Like it's not like liquidity and this extra money is just laying around for people to spend. So I was kind of hesitant to even be like, hey, here's this kind of high cost course. If you want it, great. If you don't, no problem. And when we first announced it, we got a ton of pushback. Our first email blast that we sent out, it was just a survey basically saying like, if we offered this, would you be interested? And it was a minority that said yes. It was like, I don't know, something in the neighborhood of like 30% of of the people who responded to the survey said yes. But of the 70 that said no, the vast majority of them were just like outraged that we would be offering a high priced product at the economic crisis that we're facing. And I completely get it. So it was just like, oh, like, what do? We obviously have enough demand where this is something that people want. And I believe wholeheartedly in the product. But at the same time, like, I don't want to upset those that fall into the mass majority.
What were they expecting though? Were they expecting you to give it?
Some people wanted it. Some people wanted it for like $100. Other people just thought it was in poor taste to run it at all. Other people wanted us to just include it with the membership subscription.
What is the cost right now?
For the course?
Yeah.
$2,000.
I think that sounds reasonable.
Yeah.
For 4 weeks, and then you get.
It works out to like $30 an hour that they're paying for coaching, which is seemingly okay.
That actually sounds really reasonable considering how much I've paid for coaching in the past.
Yeah. But everybody's in a different spot. So we tried to really cater to everyone. And I already knew that once we had decided to go forward with homeschool, I knew what our plan was moving forward. Like I had already, thankfully, I had enough, I guess, like forward thinking to kind of have a disaster plan in effect. And it wasn't born off of like the fear of a pandemic or the economic world around us crumbling, but more so just like, hey, we've been reinvesting 100% of our profits for the last 3 years. So if for any reason we have a downturn in sales, we might not make it. And that kind of forced me to have like this emergency plan. So I knew exactly what we were going to do. I was like, I already had a plan in place where we could scale back our workforce, really reduce our overhead, bring the price of the subscription site way, way, way down, and just try to kind of cast a wider net while pushing through a downward time. So once we decided to go ahead with homeschool, I was like, okay, that's going to be enough to get us through the year if we do well with it, which we did. And now effectively we can just kind of open our doors to everybody instead of keeping it exclusive at $125 a month. So starting May 1st, we're actually dropping the price to $9.99, and it will stay there until basically we see some sort of relief from what's happening with the pandemic, like live poker resurges or whatever the case may be.
So I think along with your training is this concept that I think, was it you that came up with Poker Out Loud?
Yeah.
So Poker Out Loud to me, and I've tweeted about it, I've put it on my Instagram. It's, I think, one of the best concepts in poker out there.
Thanks.
Tell me how you came up with this concept and like how it led to becoming, I think you've released most of season 1 on YouTube. I think there's a few more seasons.
We released the highlights.
The highlights,
or lowlights, depending on how you look at it.
How did you come up with this concept? Tell me about it. I think it's amazing. I love this concept.
Thanks. Yeah, so I definitely don't deserve very much creative credit here. Unbeknownst to me, Negreanu had done this on Poker VT like way back in the day, like 2010. I had no idea. I'd never seen it, never heard of it. To me, this was a brand new product. So I always like make it a point to give him credit for the idea in some regard, even though it didn't directly influence me. But what actually spurned the idea was I had an RFID table for a long time, and we had been running these like effectively simulations where we would play either a structured cash game or a tournament or whatever, and then we'd review afterwards. And obviously the review was always good, but what was the biggest takeaway was when we were willing to just expose our cards in real time and then have a discussion after the hand instead of waiting for the review. I was like, man, there's something here. Like if we could just do this, like if the audience could somehow be clued into this in real time, that'd be pretty great. Run It Once did something called, I can't remember if it was like pro versus pro or something like that, or pros on pros, something, I don't know, something of that nature, but it was a 9-handed sit and go with 9 of their top pros. And effectively each of them would record audio throughout the entire sit and go process until it came down to the end. And then it was all edited together where whoever it was on, they were just speaking through the spot. And I was like, man, this is like really, really well done as far as like being an instructional tool. And I was just kind of like, well, what if we married the two? Like, how can we do this in a live capacity? And so we tinkered with it. I pitched it to production. We came up with like some pretty good ideas. And I think the edited version of it, like, what we have behind our paywall, and then what's on YouTube is the student edition, the one where Chin and I play against 4 of our students. So those are like heavily edited. They're 2 shoot days that are about 10 hours each. And then so that 20 hours of footage translates into about 10 episodes that are 20 minutes each once it's fully produced. And they're not cutting any hands or anything like that. It's just each hand is like 5 to 12 minutes long minimum. And some go even like there are some that after they're produced are 5 to 12 minutes long.
I'm curious I know that you guys got a little bit of pushback with, it seemed like your VPIPs were really high in season 1.
Yeah.
And what was that all about? Because I think I read or saw you guys talking about how you wanted to play a bit more and give us a little bit more viewing into the hands.
Well, also I think that it's a byproduct of playing live poker as a whole. So it's easy for the online player to be very critical of pre-flop hand selection and the aggressive actions that a player may take in the live realm. Basically just finger wagging, saying like that's negative EV or that's a lower EV line than Equilibrium would suggest. But you have to understand that they have the luxury of volume. So everyone in the online environment is encouraged to play very close to Equilibrium because you're all there for the legitimate long haul. You're all there trying to play millions and millions and millions of hands and cut out cents on the dollar per hand.
And were you guys limited to a certain amount of hours of recording?
I mean, in Poker Out Loud specifically, we're limited to those 2 shoot days that are 10 hours each. And that only equates to 10 orbits total. Yeah. So 20 hours just to play 60 hands. your ability to even insert yourself in a lot of situations if you're playing strictly an equilibrium strategy is next to zero. And then on top of that, if you just look at it from the live perspective, where there is a ticking clock, you're never going to reach long term. I play fewer hands in a year than an average online grinder plays in like 2 to 4 weeks. Like max, I probably see 20 to 50,000 hands a year. So like what we're really trying to demonstrate is that when you're under those time constraints, the spot itself actually matters more than the quote unquote equilibrium and being protected. If I have a drunk guy at my table for 1% of my hands, I may earn like 10% of my yearly win rate strictly through that guy.
Yeah.
And it's going to require me V-pipping more. It's going to require me not giving anyone else at the table an opportunity to attack him. So I think what you saw a lot of in season 1 is 6 people who understand that about the live environment, and us all willing to just kind of throw it out there and do battle, knowing we're only playing 60 hands. And the intention of this is not to mimic a certain strategy. We were never trying to put something out there that was like, okay, if you write down everything you saw here and then extrapolate that out into a strategy by street, you'll be playing very balanced and very close to equilibrium. It's like, that's not it at all. We're just trying to put ourselves in spots and exhaust our thought process for everyone to hear, so you can hear where we go wrong, but more importantly, like where we get it right.
I feel like a lot of people don't, I would say not get you, but it feels to me like you're thinking about variables that a lot of people aren't in poker.
Yeah.
Which kind of, I guess, gives you that stigma of not being understood, or people think, that maybe you're playing a little more loose than you should. But when you tell me that I think a lot of people didn't have that consideration of the limited amount of hours that you guys are recording and how much time each hand took.
Yeah. I think you're being nice.
No, I honestly think that you're sometimes overthinking things, but in a lot of ways, overthinking is a good thing where you're considering variables that other people aren't. And it's hard to explain that to other people who don't have your viewpoint or don't have that empathy to your situation.
I guess what I was saying by you're being nice is I think the perception of me is very black and white. And it's either that I'm very specifically trained towards the environment that I'm in and am an authority there, so you can listen to what I have to say, or I'm an idiot spew monkey who doesn't do anything by the book and deserves every bit of punishment that I receive because of it. And I don't really think there's any in between.
The thing is, I think a lot of people think that the book is set in stone and doesn't realize that like the book is changing, the variables are changing, poker is adjusting, and you need to adjust. If you have to be flexible in the way you're thinking about things. That's why I like, on second thought, your pairing to Poker Out Loud. What was that concept? Because I love that you guys talk about the hands that you're in, and then later on, with more clarity, discuss the hands. How did that come about?
It was the ideas came together. Effectively, we knew we were never going to try to, I guess, put out a product with Poker Out Loud that was replicable. We didn't really want to force people to be so constrained that they were doing things totally by the book, and everybody viewing at home would just look at it and say like, oh, that's standard, that's standard, that's standard, right? We really found that what was interesting about the product was the nuanced thought process that took place for each individual player, and the gradient scale that it kind of operated on, where it wasn't ever really going to be precisely right or precisely wrong, because that's just the human element of poker. Nobody implements like a solve, right? So the best we can do is have some groundwork and heuristics and first principles of the game, and then defer back to them whenever we are trying to exhaust our thoughts as to why we're about to take some sort of action. But at the end of the day, we're gonna be very miscalibrated. We're gonna misstep all the time.
Right.
And as coaches, part of our job is to be able to dissect that and give now what the optimal strategy would be if they had more insight, or if they had the ability to clear their head, or whatever the case may be. Like, whatever. Basically, it was an opportunity for us to say, okay, here's where so and so started going down a rabbit hole, and now we can see where that thought process took them awry. So we always knew that we needed that layer of context. Otherwise, we were going to continually get that blowback of, what are you guys doing? You're just out there like playing terribly and calling it coaching.
So I find that the hardest thing with poker, besides I find a lot of it to be abstract, but I feel like we can make so many poor decisions and be rewarded.
Yeah.
And it's like ingrained in us that reward pushes us in the wrong direction so often in poker. What do you find some of the hardest things for students to overcome when you're coaching them?
Yeah, I think bias is first and foremost the most difficult. But specifically because we're a live geared target audience, I think the biggest challenge is that the online player is strong because the online player is forced to really comprehend the pot odds model and work backwards. So effectively, they understand polarization, they understand capped and uncapped ranges, they understand equity and equity thresholds, and all of this underlying math because they have to. If they don't, they'll get filleted online.
Yeah.
You just can't play a high volume of hands and not be mindful of.
I mean, you're getting filleted live, right? But it's just a slower process where it's not as painful as it is.
Well, also, you just may not, because that information is not available to your opposition. They don't have HUDs running. They don't have, you know what I mean? Like they're not able. We have no data live outside of our observation.
Right, live, you're going to go home and plug in your hands to your solver. You can't do that in person.
Right. And even when you do that live, you're still based upon what you think your assumptions are for that specific person or the environment that you're in or whatever. So it's a very, there's this concept. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the book Range by David Epstein. But effectively, he talks about the idea of kind environments versus wicked environments. And kind environments tend to lend themselves as very consistent, very cooperative, effectively like non-variable in nature, where wicked environments are ever-changing, chaotic, and just like extremely volatile in nature. And it really is the difference between online and live. We can parse out the variables so much easier online because anybody who is an irrational actor or who deviates from the baseline strategy sticks out like a sore thumb,
right?
Especially over large sample sizes. But live, we have no metric of collecting data outside of our own observation, which is obviously heavily biased. So we want certain things to be true. Therefore, we study into those things.
Are most people, I feel like most people in low stakes games are sticking out of like a GTO kind of strategy anyway.
Yeah. That part's true, but it really doesn't matter if the best players in those games are also deviants, right? There aren't very many super balanced players at 1-2.
That's true. Yeah.
And there shouldn't be, because there's more money to make by just recognizing what the average exploit is and taking advantage of it. And that's why it's such a challenge teaching live players, because they're never forced into knowing the math, right? They're good in spite of not knowing the math rather than being good because they're grounded in the math.
Thank you, Berkey. Thank you. I feel so much better. I'm such a good player.
Sure. No, it's true though. Like there are guys that I have a lot of respect for that could not possibly be able to give you a simple lesson on minimum defense frequency by comparison to pot odds being laid and what sizes are most optimal in order to make your opponent indifferent. Right? They couldn't even begin to get. They just feel it out. They're just like, turn bets are 2/3 pot. That's what our environment does.
Right.
And so like all I have to do is figure out if I'm betting the turn or not. And I base that upon what opponent I'm up against and if I think he has top pair.
So when did you start playing poker? I'm curious.
No Limit, like 2003. But I started playing in high school. Like,
do you remember the books that were out in like 2006, 2007?
Yeah.
That's our age group kind of, and I will say our because you're a little bit younger than me, but around the same age. That's where I was reading so many books back then, and they were all terrible, and they were not constructing ranges. They were not mathematically sound. They were like, okay, under the gun, just limp. You could be limping with aces. Shout out to Gavin Smith. You could be limping with 7-3. You never know.
Right.
And it kind of like live play has lightly changed from that. I mean, online obviously is a little more GTO, but yeah, it's kind of in that realm still, I think, for a lot of live players, especially if you're going to go to like 1-2.
I think you can just think of it in terms of natural evolution, right? There are certain variables that will fast track evolution, and then there are others that will greatly slow it down. And most of it is born out of need. And in the live realm, there's no need to evolve faster because the win rate that's available isn't necessarily greater than you just being honed into the people element of the game. If you can pretty comfortably exploit a certain archetype of player because their weaknesses psychologically are obvious to you, you're just going to make way more money than if you took a GTO approach to them.
So what you're saying is that a lot of people haven't needed to grow or evolve their game because they're exploiting their local player pool and they're doing fine.
Yeah. And beyond that, even like, even if you look at like $500 to like $2,000 tournament buy-ins,
right?
It doesn't take a deep understanding of game theory. Like you don't have to be at the level of beating high rollers to go out and beat an open field. But if you look at online, once you reach a certain threshold, the only thing that separates that tier of play, I shouldn't reduce it this much, but what I'm getting at is the separation between like a 200 NL person online and like a 2K NL person online is large in part just the ability to implement. So the error rate is just going to be slightly higher at 200 online than 2K online. And the availability to funding probably is another big barrier between the two. But the skill differential, it's not super great because they're just continually, as they scale through the ranks, they're just continually honing in and calibrating a pretty refined strategy already that could probably translate and beat like 100, 200 live.
Also live, I think there are like if you look at the 10K main event, it plays like a mid-stakes tournament for the most part.
Yeah.
And so it depends also the variable of popularity.
Yeah. I don't think live has a linear progression to it at all. Okay. There are some 5-10 uncapped games that are infinitely tougher than some 50-100 capped games, or uncapped games rather. And it's just like, you know, this is about how we control the lineups and who is most incentivized to play, and all, even region, right? Like Vegas games are tougher than LA games. Midwest Oklahoma is going to be like way softer than anywhere else.
Why isn't everyone moving there then?
Do you want to live there?
No.
Right? That's the other thing about live poker is we're creatures of habit. We're kind of born into our convenience. People relocated to Vegas for a long time until they realized that it wasn't the Mecca.
Right. So talk to me now and take into perspective, obviously, what's been going on with COVID-19.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the poker economy and what you think the outcome will be for the next like couple of years of live poker.
It's funny because I said recently that I thought online poker was on an apocalyptic path. And I still believe that to be true.
Now why? Because of how GTO it's become or what?
So somewhat because of strategy. So strategy and volume combined just kind of turn it into high frequency day trading, where it literally just boils down to who has the best implementation of the current tech. But the advancement of technology is the other element of it, right? So currently we're dealing with a problem that we haven't dealt with in years past, at least not to this level of ease or degree of real-time assistance, botting, all these things that are absolutely unbeatable outside of the realm of just having better technology that does the same thing.
How prominent do you think botting is right now?
Way more than I think people understand. Especially given
ACR, you talk about PokerStars, which
for sure ACR, and I don't think any of the other unregulated sites are immune to it. I'm not saying that they have a botting problem. I'm not saying that
but
people
it's more prominent than we think about.
It has to be. It just has to be, because the technology day in and day out is getting better, and the conversation isn't really being had out in the open. So the need to secure it from the unregulated site side is staying the same, right? It's not a problem until it's a problem. And I'm not saying that they're not doing their due diligence or not taking preemptive strikes against it. I don't know what the security looks like at all these sites. I just know that the grumblings in the underground communities is that real-time assistance is a major issue. People running real-time solves. It's very impossible to police right now. People could just have a secondary machine set up that is being fed the information. There's a lot of ways to circumvent the most obvious security layers. And I assume that this is only going to get worse. And in the short run, we're in a very cannibalistic ecosystem, because there's this influx of live money that's all going online that I would wager are all losing players anyway. So I think if you're like a 3 to 5 big blind,
even if you're a winning live player, yes, you're probably losing online.
I estimated that if you're a 3 to 5 big blind an hour winner live, you're probably losing like 1 to 2 big blinds per 100 online, depending how many tables you're playing and what specific games you're in. Now, whenever you throw in the fact that they're playing on unregulated apps that are known for collusion, that definitely aren't taking much security against botting or real-time assistance or anything like that nature, it might increase their loss rate to 5x, right? So in the short run, online is going to get a massive bump, and all the grinders are enjoying Christmas right now. They are going to have an increase to their win rate that might be like somewhere between 1.5 and 3x what they had seen in the past. But I think the drop off then is very, very sharp. And I think that online continues to head down this apocalyptic path because nobody's really willing to discuss how detrimental the technological both solution and problem of online presents. Like, yeah, it's great. It's convenient. You get a lot of hands in. It's also bad because it's convenient and you get a lot of hands in, right? You skin the fish a lot faster. You create this predatory environment where everybody's only looking out for their own EV and the ecosystem just crumbles underneath it, right? It's very difficult to keep the lower tier of the ecosystem available, which ultimately crumbles the highest tier of the ecosystem. So now if you don't run 2K, 5K, 10K, 25K NL, and those guys are forced to just like mass multi-table 501K NL, there's no shot, right?
Tell me though, I always found, especially in the higher stakes when we'd have the big whales in the game, I always found poker to be predatory anyway, whether it was,
I think that's
even
true.
live.
So it's the scale. It's just the scale, right? No whale is going broke in live poker. Not reasonably. It's possible for sure. You could play.
I've seen it. I've seen whales.
If you're qualifying a whale by somebody who is so wealthy that gambling losses shouldn't break them, right? Let's put it this way: if they can't get broken in the pit, they're not going to get broken in poker.
Okay, that's fair.
Does that make
sense? I've seen a whale lose everything in over a year's time high stakes cash game where the whole game
I agree
centered around this whale.
I agree, but like those types tend to be the type that are worth like a couple million.
Yes.
And don't know when to stop.
I think it was like 3 million.
Yeah. So like he's a whale because he has more wealth than the people he's playing against and far less skill. But in the grand scheme of the poker economy and the world, $3 million is a pittance, right? Like there are people playing with 9 figures, 8, 9 figures consistently.
Yeah.
Those are true and utter whales. And the people who tend to be worth like 3 million to 5 million to 10 million, whatever, those tend to be the guys who populate the 510 to 50, 100 realm. And it's pretty hard to lose that amount in a live arena over even a year or two. So I agree it's very predatory, but it's the scale element of it. You're talking about like a handful of people populating a handful of games and everybody fighting tooth and nail to get a piece of the EV. What I am worried about is the aggregate. I think that the fallout from this is going to be short term for sure, extremely detrimental, but I think long term it may reshape what we kind of have seen the live landscape to be. And that's hurtful because we just had record numbers.
Yeah, in what way would it reshape it? What's the reshaping?
Well, my fear always with ecosystems is that the bottom collapses, not so much the top, right? If we plucked every single whale out of No Limit Hold'em, yeah, it would reduce some of the stakes in that we could potentially scale to. We might not have a high roller scene. It may create an influx of good players into slightly lower stake games, but because they can't play a high volume, there's a better chance that Justin Bonomo would quit poker than go back to grinding 3,500 WPTs, right? Because his ceiling is just way too low in poker by comparison to anything else that he could be doing. So I think that like even if we plucked out the richest of the rich from the ecosystem, all it does is lower the ceiling or the greatest potential for the best of the best in the game and force them to move on to other endeavors earlier. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. When the bottom of the ecosystem crumbles, though, the whole system in and of itself collapses upon itself. So what we're going to see as an economic fallout here is a massive increase in unemployment. We're going to see rooms that just don't open again. There might be full-blown casinos that don't recover from this. Like, you know, we're entering what, like day 20 or something like that.
Yeah.
But it could be 3 months, 5 months, right?
I think it's gonna be 3 to 6 months. The numbers are looking like 3 to 6 months, and we might have about 2 years of on and off social distancing orders.
Right. And if that's the case, you know, all of these casinos that we've wondered for so long how they're getting by just aren't any longer. They don't have 6 months reserves just stored up, and effectively the ability to weather 2 years of a downturn where now all of a sudden they're not acquiring new revenue. They can't expand. They can't keep up with the people who are prepared for this. And this speaks to a larger picture of the economy as a whole. The winners in situations like this are the conglomerates, right? Like MGM will be fine. The Wynn will be fine. You know, the Venetian will be fine. Just like Facebook will be fine. Google will be fine. Tesla will be fine. They're going to be the ones who are moving the big pieces when this is all said and done. And the problem with that is, you know, we lose the everyman. And the everyman really props up these ecosystems. So the barrier of entry to get into poker is just likely to increase dramatically. And we're going to lose a lot of those break-even, slight losers, slight winners from the game. Removing that number of participants from our community decreases the liquidity pool by a greater figure than if we took out all the whales, at least in my opinion.
So you're saying a lot of the like 1, 3, 2, 5, even 5, 10 players would be out of the pool, going off to do something else to make ends meet.
Yeah, I think so.
That's interesting. So when you said the bottom, I thought you were just talking about players. I wasn't considering how many small casinos or small card rooms may close. A consideration, you know, circling back to the whole Postle thing, there is a consideration that Stones may close after all of this.
Sure.
And not end up having to have any accountability
Yeah, that would be really unfortunate. The thing is, though, they have a pretty good business model. They don't have competition, and it's
What do you mean they
different
don't have
than.
competition?
Well, it's just them in Thunder Valley within however many miles, right?
They have Capital Casino also.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, but they are like a very posh, nice poker room.
Yeah.
Um, I think I think there'll be a boom definitely once those doors open up again.
Yeah.
But if they can sustain themselves up until that point, and when I say they, I mean like Thunder Valley and Capital Casino.
Yeah.
Um, you're kind of making me sad right now thinking about this.
I've been doing that a lot lately. I'm sorry. It's not my intention. Believe it or not, I have a very strange calm about me with this whole thing. Like, I don't know. I was talking about this a little bit on our vlogcast, and it's a very, you'll appreciate it. It's a bit of a nihilistic vantage point.
I mean, I am a nihilist.
I
So.
know.
I mean, when I say nihilist, people get so mad at me, but really I'm like a long-term nihilist. Like the sun's going to burn out.
Yeah.
The energy will evenly be dispersed in the universe. Nothing will be anymore. But I think my life matters right now. I think I can give myself meaning to every day.
I have a weird perspective on nihilism in the sense that I think it's very rational and logical, but I also think it's just like, and I don't mean this offensively, but I also think it's just like semi lazy to just be like, meh, we're all gonna die. Like my sister's this way, where she just makes awful life choices and just like YOLOs it, where she's like, live fast, die young. And it's like, that's not a thing. Like that, I try to explain to her, I'm like, you do these things. Like she smoked for 15 years. She finally just quit. But it's like she smoked for 15 years and she's like, I don't care. Like, I'm going to enjoy myself while I can. And then I'm just going to die young. And I go, no. You're not going to die young. That's the problem.
Well, smoking.
You're going to live till you're 80.
Yeah, you're going to live to your 80 and then you're going to get some sort of lung cancer.
Yeah, you'll have emphysema.
Death.
Right. And you're going to be miserable your last 15 years. And I'm going to have to deal with it.
Yeah, she's going to move in with you and you're going to have to get her oxygen.
Right.
No, I mean, like, I don't live my life like a daily nihilist.
I get it.
I just think long term, there really is no meaning with anything we do. But short term, yes. Like, I would definitely like to write a book and leave something behind so that, yeah. I don't know why. We all feel like we need to leave ourselves or have like an infinite legacy, or which is like children sometimes, or things we write, or
it's arrogance, but I think it's helpful to this, like to society as a whole. I think it's a motivating factor.
Well, it's a selfish gene. I mean, Richard Dawkins wrote about it, and then Wait But Why talks about it. Like our genes are selfish and want to carry on.
Right.
And so we have this like drive inside of us.
Yeah, and I think that's good. And I think nihilism like logics out of that, where it's just like
it's polarized, right? It's kind of like you have this drive to survive and carry on and live as long as you can, but then in the back of your mind it's like, well, none of this matters anyway.
Right.
It's called a balanced range, Berkey.
Yeah, so I mean, like, if you can find, so I think for a lot of people, like, or a lot of people who subscribe to nihilism, they find calm and comfort in the idea that there is no bigger picture type thing. And I think that's fine. The same way that people of faith find calm and comfort in there being an afterlife.
I would just say that it's just subscribing to reality. Reality is that, like,
reality is a perspective.
Oh, so we're going to get into this again. Like, you live in this subjective realm. I think there are a lot of objective things, and not everything is subjective, but like objectively, realistically, there's no deity. There's nothing we can prove that's out there besides space and other universes or galaxies. There's one universe.
Yeah, but lack of proof doesn't ever equate to.
Hey, disbelief. Come on. Let's take a grasp of reality. And that's what it is. It's just reality. It's just like, hey, this is it. Like, it's the same thing as before we were born.
No, that's a convenient thought. And if that helps you get through.
is
I'm not. I'm not trying to be dismissive. I'm literally.
I don't think you're being dismissive. I just think.
I am trying to push your
I think
button.
that having I guess like our beliefs, or I hate the word beliefs, but like having believing in facts and objective reality is really easy and calming. Having to do mental gymnastics to believe some sort of deity is involved in things is just not my thing. It's just like so much more calmer now that I've let go of like all this fantasy type of thing.
I'm not arguing for the side of a higher power, though I think from a probability standpoint, it's greater than zero.
I think your skepticism is it's so funny. Most people are skeptic against religion, and your skepticism is potentially for religion or something else, or like you're skeptic against everything, which is fine.
I'm trying to come from the perspective that all I know is we don't know. And I apply that to just about everything. So even things that we think are empirical truths and objective realities, I would wager we're just limited by our absolute scope of knowledge and the dimensions through which we see the world. And that'll change and evolve as...
Okay, there's a red teapot floating around the earth, and you can't prove that there isn't. So you didn't know about the shiny teapot that floats around the earth? You can't prove that it's not there.
I mean, I personally can't, but I think we could go about proving it. Anyway, what I was trying to say is
poker economics.
No. This is like semi-nihilistic, but I feel like this weird sense of it's coming from a very privileged place, in the sense that I believe I'm going to be okay, and I believe those around me are going to be okay, and that's kind of an unfair vantage point because I also believe not everyone's going to be okay, and that's
you're also. You've put yourself in a situation where you're living with a group of people and you guys are all, I'm not saying you live in a commune, but you guys all kind of like, I'm pretty sure if one person falls, the rest of you pick that person up, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And so
like, I guess what I'm saying, but what I'm saying is I don't think that's true of everybody. I think that there's going to be a lot of suffering that comes from the fallout of this pandemic. And that's really unfortunate. So like, I think it's important for me to acknowledge that before I go on with my statement, basically.
Right.
That said, I find like some sense of ease and calm in recognizing that, to me, in some weird way, this pandemic is just a byproduct of like nature purging. And what I'm kind of saying by that is like we have so many clear issues that as a civilization we're not acknowledging, be it global warming or other environmental issues that we've brought upon the planet and are doing nothing to correct. In some strange way, it's just like Mother Nature has a way of always righting the ship and ensuring that we don't overpopulate, we don't overpollute, we don't overdo any of these things. Like Earth is going to be fine. And we kind of see it throughout history, right? It's like, and I don't want to go down the dark path of like, this could be the
other plagues and...
Yeah, there's been plagues. There's been, even going as far back as like the dinosaurs getting wiped out. It's like, in some weird way, it feels like a reset. And specifically to me, what I've felt like this has done is reset the whole social paradigm, where we've been so blessed for so long with advancement, with living in a bountiful life, where so many of us are just born into privilege at this point and are existing. It's gotten to the point where like social signaling is just a matter of like who's more willing to acknowledge the privilege that they've been born into type of thing. I feel like this has been a total reset where by removing our ability to actually have social interaction, we've abandoned these like false idol platforms that we've created. Like social media to me has been more dark in the sense of like, I've seen less stuff being shared that is empty over the last 3 weeks that I've been in quarantine than I have over the last 3 years. It seems like I'm seeing like more written word, more stories, more actual news, more resources, more entertainment, and way less of the complaining and the update on my food and the decadence and, you know, the social peacocking, if you will.
Okay. So I have a few things to say about that. The Mother Nature purging itself. I honestly wouldn't think about it this way. I would think that now I don't know why there are wild animal these markets that they have in, and I'm sure it's not just in China. I'm sure it's in a lot of countries. And
the wet markets or whatever.
Yeah, and so I don't know if those markets are there because people in general cannot afford different kinds of food or more safe food or processed food.
Yeah, I thought it was because of overpopulation.
Yeah, and so I think that it's not like Mother Nature sitting there thinking I'm going to purge the human population. I think it's just like we're overstepping our boundaries because we're overpopulating, because people are having to go into food sources that they would not normally have.
Yeah, I mean, it's the chicken and egg problem. Like, where the source comes from is kind of semantical.
Yeah, and I think like with social media, I think generally it's a lot of younger people, and younger people tend to be more self, I guess, self-absorbed or self-centered and not so in depth in their thinking. They haven't grown up yet. I mean, I think it's like a typical, young person thing on social media. I don't know, like.
Well, kind of, because it started with our generation being young, but we haven't abandoned social media into our 30s and 40s.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
So like, so
but
social media is kind of
like
aging.
There's a big part of my life that I'm not willing to just expose. So you get the superficial portion of that. So I think like a lot of people just are not exposing their deepest and darkest.
And I guess what I'm saying is I feel like I'm seeing that slightly change. Not to the point where they're like revealing skeletons in their closet, but more so to the point where you're getting to know the actual person behind the profile.
Yeah, yeah. And I enjoy vulnerability. I enjoy when people break down these I don't really enjoy following superficial like selfies all day, although I am probably one of those people who posts too much bullshit. But I do enjoy the vulnerability from people, and maybe this is a good time for people to expose themselves in that way.
Yeah, I guess all I'm saying is I guess that it's a forced thing. They don't have a choice because they're not going to post a picture of their Kraft macaroni and cheese 36 days in a row that they had for dinner because they're stuck on quarantine, right? Like there's nothing glamorous about what any of us are doing right now. And I think that's reduced us back down to something more human where we are reliant upon the tribal aspect of what makes us us. And a lot of the now social platforms are being communicated in a way of like, hey, I just miss human interaction. Talk to me.
Yeah. This tribalism that you speak of, it is like infuriating to me. I feel like we've evolved to be very tribal. And now we're, coming into this new day and age, we're trying to get to Mars, but we still have this lingering tribalism that's like, it drives me insane. To take objective data, like let's say COVID-19, objective World Health Organization data, and then we take it and we still divide it and we still take lines on it and we separate ourselves based off of that objective data. It's infuriating. It drives me insane. How are we doing this? How do we still find a way to define ourselves, to divide ourselves with objective data?
I think that's an education problem, not a tribal problem necessarily.
But
I get it.
In our core, our base, we have to divide ourselves and become tribal about everything almost.
Yeah, I agree. Like we have this desire to compete against one another and to choose sides. But if you look back to like religion, there was a portion of time where like religion was it was fairly undivided, right? It may have had sex
depending on where you were in the world. I guess
Fair.
we didn't have as much globalization, right? So
yeah, right. So yeah, like depending on the region that you fell into, it was almost certain across the populace that they were going to be religious. Right. Now, I guess you could make the argument that it was divided basically upon which deity you believed in or whatever the case may be in accordance to that. But I guess my whole point is that we can unify behind the idea of something we all believe in. The problem is our messaging. And currently, in the civilization that we live in, divisiveness is what makes the most money.
Or gets you the most votes.
Right. However you want to quantify it. Yeah. You're always going to outperform by being divisive than by being unifying. Because you're right. It just speaks to an inherent trait in us where you force sides.
Do you think that Trump is purposely dividing us with this COVID stuff, which seems weird that
I don't.
Come on, let's go into politics.
No, it's fine. I honestly don't think this man is smart enough to have done anything on purpose in the last 25 years. I mean, I just think that like he is very fortunate with where he landed in life, and past the age of like 55. I imagine his plan was, I'm just going to do whatever I want to do. And then whatever comes off of that comes off of it. Now,
I read an article about him that this psychologist wrote an article that he doesn't have a reflective bone in his body. Like he doesn't reflect on any of his encounters or anything in the past. He's just like living in the moment as like a third party narrator or speaking about himself in the third person.
I imagine if he has a single muscle in his body, it's just his traps from going like this all day. Like, I don't know. He just lives a life of indifference.
How did he become our president?
It's embarrassing, but it's also very reflective of that divisiveness where it's like you can manipulate results in a way that betters a bad actor if you are willing to kind of sacrifice the moral high ground. And I think we see this all the time. Like, in the business world, there are short-term tactics that will absolutely create a divisive market that will make you the most popular at that short time. It's like playing that social game where you prop yourself up by tearing other people down. But it's a zero-sum game. For you to win in that situation, others have to lose. So through this divisiveness, you absolutely have to crumble your competitors. And it's also, because it's a zero-sum game, it's an endless loop. So it's impossible for you to rise and not fall. Somebody else will eventually take your legs out from underneath you in order to better themselves, or the collective will eventually catch wind of your tactics and grow tired of them because you can only hide it for so long. So it's fantastic for short-term gains, like a 4-year presidency or trying to rise to the head of a specific market. But if you don't then correct and become a good actor once you have that platform and now maintain the loyalty of that consumer base that you've duped, you're just ultimately going to fall by your own metrics.
Do you feel that he's falling now?
Not as much as he should be. Honestly, I feel like he's gotten so fortunate with like this pandemic and other strife.
How has this pandemic helped him?
Because he gets to leverage it in a way where he like messages such that we're quote unquote at war. And we're so close to him just being able to say it's a hazard to the world to have the November election.
Do you think he has advisors around him that keep him like, I feel like I really think he's strategic in saying, when he said like, this is from China, this is the Chinese virus.
Yeah.
I felt like it was a strategy because then the idiots who do this could blame another country or blame something. It's like I read that it's like a strategy tactic so that
I feel like it's not on purpose. I feel like it's not on purpose, but whoever is in charge of the messaging part of it just anticipates or knows him well enough now to know which direction he's going to take. And they're just like, okay, we're making this a China thing now. You know what I mean? Like,
It's
because
I'm
it's just
flabbergasted at his response to everything. I'm just like, okay, I'm living in a cartoon world. This isn't real.
the twisted thing is that very, very intelligent people will forgive all of the bad actions in lieu of one good one. So if he handles one response correctly, I'm seeing it already. I'm seeing the apologist out there.
Matt Glantz.
Glantz comes to mind. Polk comes to mind. Like,
yeah.
People who are just like, he's handling the, you can say what you want about the beginning, but he's handling this very well now. And it's just like, is he? Is he though? I mean, like, is he really doing more than the bare minimum? Are we really on a trajectory that is not going to be worse than Italy? I think people have just been like cooped up long enough where they think that we've gotten ahead of it, not recognizing that Italy's been on quarantine for twice as long.
Right. And I think we're surpassing Italy with amount of positive
Right.
cases. And if you look at what's happening in New York, it's their hospitals are overwhelmed.
Oh, yeah. They're
people don't understand if they're not in the front lines. I'm a registered nurse, actually, and Nevada registered nurse. And no one understands that we actually use hospitals for other things. And when the whole hospital is only being used for COVID patients and you can't go in there for anything, you'll soon see. And on top of that, a lot of your population is getting sick and needs help. It's I feel like it doesn't hit home until people see people around them suffering from it.
Yeah, like a lot of people were saying, this doesn't impact a certain age group, so we should just allow them to be the workforce. Well, I mean, it does, but like, let's say statistically, from a statistical relevance standpoint, it's less impactful to this 18 to, let's say, 35 age group.
Let's split hairs, because I know you like doing that, Berkey. Let's split hairs on impactfulness. Like, yes, the death rates are lower for people in their 30s and 40s, but half of the people in the hospital are younger, and being intubated in your 30s or 40s, you can probably survive that better than someone in their 80s, but you may have long-term damage to your lungs and heart that we're not aware of yet. I've been reading up on that, actually. They're showing that there might be some long-term damage to lungs and heart to young people who recover from COVID-19. And then being reinfected potentially. I've read about that too. And so we don't know any long-term studies right now.
Yeah, I'm making your case for you. I'm just doing it through an antagonistic point of view. So let's assume
that's what I've been wanting.
So let's assume that particular age group, like 18 to 35, is relatively unimpacted, and they could be the quote unquote workforce. Well, they're still carriers, right? And let's say even that we're cold-hearted, ruthless people that don't care about the group that is high risk of 65 and older. Let's say it's a boomer remover, right? And we all just want to see that generation perish, okay? And we all agree upon this, right? Like, okay, the old people are going to die. The young people are going to carry forward through the workforce, and it's not going to be that big a deal. We're all going to survive. The economy is going to be great. What they're not recognizing is that even through that whole process, that purging of the older generation, if you will, whatever the case may be, the amount of medical resources that are going to be consumed are going to mean that if you have appendicitis, if you come down with if you get pregnant, if you get sick in some other extreme measure, you break something, you get stabbed, you get shot, you have these other things that you get into a car accident and you're severely injured, all of these other things, there's no care for you. There's no care for you because every bed is being occupied by this generation that you didn't care about that's going to die, right?
Just want to give a public service announcement that Berkey does not sound like a horrible human being. He does not want to purge the boomers. He was just giving us a scenario.
I feel like every time I try to convey something through an extreme example like that, my message is totally lost, and all you hear is like, boomer remover.
Chin warned me when I picked you guys up at the airport. Chin's like, he's going to sound like a total asshole, serial killer, whatever. Just, this is just the way he sounds. He doesn't really mean it.
Yeah. I'm just saying, like, because people are so nonchalant about the way that we can handle this better, basically. And they're implying like they just understand, well, A, math and probabilities, but B, just like what the worst case scenario is. Like, oh, I'm 30 something, I'm not going to get it. I don't care if I'm a carrier because the people who are going to get it aren't important to me anyway. Like, they're not important to society. They've lived their long life, or whatever the case may be. And the problem with that whole mindset is, even if you were right, which they're not, right? They're just not. Like, human life has value. I don't care how old you are. At some point, you're going to be 65 and wish the younger generation was caring more for you. But right. That aside, even if they were completely right, they're completely ignorant to the level of resources it takes for an entire generation to die, right? It just occupies a lot of our fundamental resources. And suddenly, when you find yourself as a 30-something who's sick, injured, or otherwise, you're like, where's my hospital bed? It's like, sorry, pal, you wanted to work through COVID. Deal with it. Go back on spring break with your bullet wounds.
Fuck.
Oh, right, because then it becomes turnabout's fair play. Like, if you're willing to allow this generation to be susceptible to to be victimized by this disease, then
I'm just gonna take a clip of you like, look, if we want a whole generation to die, that takes resources.
It does. There's a practical, economical way of looking at this. It's expensive for people to die.
Oh, fuck. Look, while we're on this topic, I was really worried about Chin for a long time. He was MIA in your vlogs, and I'm really happy that he's alive. I'm glad that he's not missing in multiple pieces around the greater Nevada state area.
He was just love struck.
He was still? He was.
No.
Is he over it like the rest of us?
God, I hope so, man. It's the only thing that's going to allow this business to survive.
Tell him to stop.
I know. I don't get it.
Yeah, glad he's alive. Glad people of his generation are still alive. He's 65, right?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. It just makes me cringe. Just the whole.
Which part?
The whole talk of it takes it takes a lot of resources to let a whole generation die.
You're a nihilist. It's just acknowledging the facts.
I said I'm a long-term nihilist. I really enjoy old people. I'm one of them. And I'm going to get there before you. I hope that people care enough about me to
Me too. I try to do my best now to pay it forward so that someone remembers me when I'm a cripple.
Oh, like, they're going to remember you, Berkey. We'll wheel you to the World Series of Poker 2046.
God bless it. Wow, dark times, 2046.
You'll have won your fourth World Series of Poker bracelet.
You're giving me a lot of credit. It's been 15 World Series now, and I have 0.
GTO is no longer a factor within poker. Pio Solver is now illegal.
Starting stacks are 10,000 big blinds. Does it complicate
10,000 big blinds. The games I play in are 10 big blinds.
The World Series is actually one event. It's just 65 days long.
That's what non-poker players think. They think it's one event. Do you play the World Series of Poker? And I'm like, which event? Well, the World Series of Poker.
The one that's on TV.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it.
So anything else you want to give us that's not dark and depressing? What's Solve for Why planning on doing the rest of the year besides homeschool?
We're taking a big step back, so we're going to reduce our content release a little bit. Currently, we're releasing one piece every one piece every pretty much every day. So we're releasing 5 to 6 pieces of content a week behind the paywall. We're going to reduce that to one piece of content a week, and it's largely just going to be monthly masterminds via Zoom or play and explain, where we put in a session and we go through our strategy and that type of stuff. I guess more standard-ish training metrics that people are accustomed to seeing on training sites. And that's going to come with the reduced cost. And then, for Chin and I, we're just going to like try to be prepared for when we ramp back up. So it'll be a matter of having courses already created that we can just go to launch, the second live poker returns and we feel like the market's stable enough to increase our price again to what it was. Once we get off quarantine, we need to film a season of Poker Out Loud. I want to do another free season for YouTube that will be a vlogger edition. So I actually won't even be playing in it.
What about Poker Go?
We have a documentary that's been in the works for 18 months. It was supposed to reach final production last August, and we're just getting to the final cut now that we partnered with Poker Go with. So fingers crossed, sometime by summer, I'm hoping that it'll be up on Poker Go. But we've been working at a snail's pace. Like at a very minimum, I owe them an apology. But yeah, it's been rough. Like we've had so much production to overcome over the last like 12 months, and throwing a full length feature documentary on top of it, just a lot for those guys to take in. But yeah, we're going to be doing that. I may have another project in the works with them while we're all in quarantine, something that can be done remotely. So fingers crossed that goes through. But yeah, I don't know. It's a weird thing because we have a really good relationship with Poker Go. And they're a huge resource to us. Like they're pretty good about letting us use their content. Really good friends with Brent. I get to play in those games when they run, which is nice. But we haven't really found that like perfect synergy yet where the content we're making fits correctly behind their paywall. And I don't know if that's supposed to happen, if it will ever happen. Maybe it's better that we exist separately. I'm not sure, but there's always an open relationship there where like when we have ideas, it's like, hey, this is a little bit too big for us to take on ourselves. They're usually a pretty willing partner.
Thank you so much. I know that I've been trying to get you on the show for a long time and you're super busy and I appreciate your time.
Happy to.
Okay. Well, you have a good rest of your night. I know you don't drink alcohol, but I'll have a glass of wine for you.
Please enjoy.
I'm trying to survive the pandemic.
Yeah, get drunk on my behalf.
Yeah, I will. Okay, well, you have a good night. Thank you so much. And
You too.
I will release this tomorrow for you.
Cool.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.